That trashy shit is perfect for you, Marjorie Jade, sneered her shrill voice, slicing straight through my dignity in front of 23 members of the Parker family. 3 seconds later, Attorney Graham lifted his head, his cold voice striking the air like a hammer. And the rights to all underground resources go to Marjorie Bennett. The room, once buzzing with laughter, fell dead silent. Jade froze as if someone had slapped her across the face. The very people who had been cheering for her moments earlier suddenly changed color, pretending they'd never laughed at all. And me? I simply looked at Jade and spoke slowly, each word sharp as a blade. Sweetheart, there's a lot you don't know. No one in that room had the faintest idea that the trashy shed hid a secret. Harold, my late husband, sacrificed his life to protect. And in just a few minutes, everything they believed they owned would come crashing down. If it were you, would you stay silent and swallow the humiliation, or stand up and expose an entire family? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the twists coming next. I am Marjorie Bennett, 52 years old, dark-skinned African American. Nearly 30 years in the Bennett family taught me how to endure the probing looks, the subtle comments that always hinted I didn't belong here. But never, not once in my entire life, had I been dragged into the center of a room and thrown to the wolves as entertainment. That day, the conference room was so large you could hear echoes even when no one spoke. But when Jade rose and pointed straight at me, the space between us shrank into a single blade aimed at my chest. That trashy shed is perfect for you, Marjorie. Laughter erupted instantly, spreading like wildfire. 23 members of the Parker family stared at me as though I just claimed the most pathetic prize ever awarded. I stood still, my hand gripping the edge of the chair, my heart caving in on itself as if someone had crushed it in their fist. I looked to Evan, my son, hoping to see even the smallest sign of support. But he bowed his head, shoulders collapsing, fingers twisting together like a child caught doing wrong. He didn't defend me. He didn't speak. That silence cut deeper than Jade's words. Jade stood there like a smug little predator who had just tasted blood, lips curled, eyes gleaming with vicious satisfaction. That expression, sharp and poisonous, was one I'd feared since the day she entered this family. Before I could breathe, Attorney Graham cleared his throat and read the next line of the will, holding the document with both hands as if it weighed far more than paper. Rights to the underground resources belong to Marjorie Bennett. Silence dropped like a stone. Absolute suffocating silence. No heavy breaths, no shuffling paper, no clinking cups. The same mouths that laughed loudest were now frozen open without a sound. The faces that mocked me moments ago snapped toward each other in confusion, as if they'd missed the most important twist of the story. Jade blinked, once, twice, then went completely still. I didn't smile, but something inside me shifted. Not joy, not triumph, something closer to witnessing the final puzzle piece Harold left behind fall into place. I heard my own voice echo inside my head. Harold, if you were still alive, you would stand in front of me like a shield. You would block every cruel stare in this room. But now it's just me and this humiliation carved into the air. I drew a slow breath, lifted my head, and looked Jade straight in the eyes. She tried to look calm, but her eyelid twitched, her breath hitched, and her chest tightened. She knew there was something she didn't know. Something I did. Something Harold did when he wrote the final line of his will. I spoke slowly, each word placed like a stone. You don't know as much as you think, Jade. A murmur rippled through the room. I could feel it. Her fear was greater than her arrogance. Then, at the peak of the tension, the door behind me opened. Footsteps, steady, measured, echoed into the room. A man stepped in, his eyes sweeping across the crowd as if he had been standing outside listening the entire time. He stopped in front of me and said, voice low but booming through the room like thunder, "Marjorie, you haven't told them the truth yet, have you?" The room held its breath again, and in that moment, I knew the real nightmare had only just begun. The room fell into a heavy silence after the stranger's words, as if a giant stone had been dropped into deep water. I could hear someone swallow hard, hear breath breaking into small pieces, and it felt as though every bit of daylight had been sucked out of the room, leaving nothing but a coldness that seeped straight into bone. The man stepped forward, his dark eyes settling on me. There was no anger in them, no fear, only the weight of someone who had been standing in the shadows for far too long, waiting for this exact moment. I recognized him the instant he removed his light-colored hat. Cross. The man Harold once mentioned in fragments, the man who worked with him on projects I was never allowed to see, the man Harold said was one of the few he could trust. Cross nodded at me, then turned toward the tense room. "Harold asked me to deliver the truth on this exact day." His voice was low, steady, and sharp enough to slice the air. I saw Jade flinch, her shoulders jerking as if someone had cracked a whip across her back. A few relatives shifted uneasily, chairs scraping the floor. Jade bared her teeth and screamed, her voice acidic. "Who gave you the right to meddle in my family's business?" Cross looked at her like she was a child trying to hide dirt on her hands. No anger, no contempt, just the calm certainty that she had no escape. He turned back to me, opened an old leather case, and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. The sight of Harold's handwriting on it made my stomach twist. I reached out for it, hesitating for a heartbeat. Fear crept up, not fear of the truth, but fear of what Harold had known before he took his last breath and what he never got the chance to tell me. Cross placed the envelope in my hands. His palms were warm, as if he'd been guarding this envelope for years. I opened the letter. Harold's handwriting leaned slightly to one side, hurried yet familiar. I read the first line, and it felt like an invisible rope tightened around my chest. "Marjorie, you're about to be humiliated, but only for 3 seconds." I gripped the paper so hard, its edge pressed into my skin. Harold knew. He knew exactly how Jade would stand in that room and strike me with her words. He knew I would be mocked, belittled, turned into a cheap joke. But he also knew what would happen after those 3 seconds. I read on. Harold wrote that the shed was never a shed. He wrote about secret trips to Alabama, documents he hid there, things he was never allowed to reveal publicly. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, half wanting to turn around, half wanting to jump. Jade tried to glance at the letter, but I tightened my grip, not letting her see a single word Harold wrote. Then the final lines chilled me completely. "If you've read this far, the traitor is standing no more than 2 meters away from you." I looked up. Jade was standing exactly 2 meters away, just as Harold said. She stood frozen, her breath uneven, her eyes darting around the room as though she feared someone would see right through her. Harold had known. He had known what I refused to believe, that my own daughter-in-law was capable of something far darker than cruelty. No one spoke. The silence thickened so heavy I could hear the pounding of my own pulse. Cross gave me a look, a signal that we had reached the point of no return. He placed his leather case on the long table, unzipped it, and pulled out a small black object, smooth, cold, barely the size of a thumb. He set it on the table. The tiny click it made sounded like a gun being cocked. A USB drive. Cross looked directly at Jade, then at everyone in the room, letting each word fall like a hammer. In here is proof Jade met Harold 7 hours before he died. No one breathed. No one moved. And in that moment, I saw the light inside Jade's eyes die, snuffed out like a flame doused in ice water. The room, for one long moment that felt like a century, drowned in a truth that would change my life forever. And Jade's life even more. From that second on, the story had no way back. The room thickened the moment Cross placed the black USB stick on the table. I could feel every breath catch in the throats around me, as if everyone knew whatever hid inside that device could shatter the fragile peace this family had been pretending to hold. Cross didn't need to say another word. He plugged the USB into Graham's laptop, and within seconds, the large screen lit up. At first, the image was blurry, then slowly sharpened. I recognized Harold's back immediately, tall, slightly stooped from age, but still carrying that unyielding strength he always had. He stood in front of the Alabama storage building, the same place I hadn't returned to in months. The dim night made the scene feel colder, heavier. Then Harold's voice broke through the speakers, rough, tired, but achingly familiar. "Jade, why are you here at this hour?" My entire body froze. Evan, standing beside me, was shaking so hard the joints in his fingers turned white. The screen shifted angle, and Jade appeared. Her hair down, makeup heavy, eyes sharp, nothing like the sweet daughter-in-law she had tried to present herself as. The air in the room thickened. And then it came, a sentence sharper than any blade, slicing right through whatever trust remained in this family. "If you just die, I can finally have the life I want." Evan broke. Not a loud cry, but a strangled sound, as if something inside him had been ripped out. He stepped back, crumpling into a chair, hands covering his face. The entire room was silent, too stunned, too ashamed to look at him or at me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding so violently it felt like it wanted to burst free. On the screen, Harold stumbled back, eyes wide, while Jade's voice remained calm, flat, as thin and deadly as a tightened noose. "I'm done. You keep Evan trapped in that old house while I live like a servant to this family. I'm tired." Evan lifted his head, eyes blazing with pain. He stared at Jade as if seeing her for the first time. You went to see my dad without telling me? Why? You met him at midnight to say this?" Jade folded her arms, showing not even a flicker of remorse. "I don't need your permission." Her voice was cold, stone solid, and terrifyingly steady, like she had been waiting for this moment, waiting to tear off the mask she had worn for years. Evan rose abruptly, knees trembling. I had to grab his arm to steady him. He whispered to me, barely audible, broken between breaths. "Mom, who did I marry? Who have I been living with all these years?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know how to tell him that I too had allowed a venomous snake into our home, fed it with trust, sheltered it with kindness, and never saw the fangs until now. Jade took a step forward, pointing her finger straight at me with eyes like sharpened claws. "You're the reason Harold stressed himself to death. You couldn't manage your house, couldn't control Evan, and he collapsed under it. You think he died of heart disease? Keep lying to yourself." I inhaled sharply, unsure whether it was rage, grief, or the cruelty of her words that made my hands go numb. I had endured many insults in my life, but never had anyone placed Harold's death on my shoulders with such venom. Cross moved closer, positioning himself like a shield. He looked at Jade first, then the rest of the room, his voice deep and steady, leaving no room for denial. Harold did not die of a heart attack. He was forced to ingest medication. Every whisper, every breath, every glance died instantly. My knees nearly gave out. Evan's eyes went wide, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was being pulled back from a cliff. The room dropped into a silence so heavy it felt like a grave. And in that moment, I understood that Harold's death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the nightmare Jade had dragged this family into. After the last video finished playing, the meeting room fell into a silence so heavy that even a pin drop would have echoed. I stood in the center, surrounded by the horrified, ashamed, and bewildered faces of people who had mocked me just that same morning. Cross wasn't finished. He opened another folder on the black USB, and the large screen lit up immediately, displaying geological maps marked with thick red mineral lines hidden deep under Alabama soil. Attorney Graham stepped closer to the screen, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. He finally spoke low but clear. An international corporation once offered $120 million for this piece of land. The entire room jolted. I heard someone choke behind me. Jade nearly collapsed back into her chair, gripping her own hands until her knuckles turned white. She stared at the map with wide eyes, realizing that the words she had spat at me, "That trash shed suits you, Marjorie," were now slamming back into her like a divine punishment. Cross continued his calm voice, carrying the weight of undeniable truth. Harold refused. He didn't want to sell the land because he knew the locals would lose their livelihoods if the mine was overexploited. I stared at the map, remembering the days Harold came home with red dirt on his clothes, the way he stroked my hair and simply said, "There's still work to do down there." Now I understood. He wasn't protecting land, he was protecting people. Suddenly, Jade shot up, panic flooding her eyes. No, this can't be true. That was just an abandoned storage shed. It can't be." She backed away as if the floor beneath her had shattered. No one moved to steady her. No one stood on her side anymore. I turned and faced Jade. Her eyes were trembling, but I was no longer shaken or wounded. Everything inside me felt grounded because the truth stood with me now. I spoke slowly, each word heavy enough to anchor itself into the marble floor. The trash shed is feeding an entire region, my dear. The room froze. Evan stood behind me, eyes red but steady. Jade looked as if someone had struck her straight in the soul. What she mocked, belittled, and used to humiliate me turned out to be something far beyond her comprehension. Cross returned to the screen and opened the final slideshow. Photos of Harold signing the mine protection documents appeared, along with confidential meeting notes, and finally a page marked with red ink. Harold signed the mine protection contract the afternoon before he died, Cross said. My heart slowed as if preparing itself for impact. And Harold died right after signing that contract. Someone didn't want that to happen. All eyes instantly swung toward Jade, then toward Dalton standing near the doorway, pale and stiff. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too loudly. It felt like the entire world tilted, because the truth waiting at the end of this revelation would be far more brutal than anything we had faced so far. And I knew what came next would change everything. The air in the room had not yet recovered from the shock about the mineral deposit when Cross opened another folder inside the black USB. This time, it wasn't maps or technical reports, but screenshots of text messages. White letters sliced across the dark screen like blades. My heart dropped when I saw the sender's name. Dalton. Councilman Dalton. The man Harold had spoken of with a rare kind of caution. Cross zoomed in on one message, making the entire room lean forward involuntarily. "Once we get rid of that old man, you'll have everything." I heard several sharp intakes of breath, chairs scraping against the floor. Evan shot up, unable to believe his own eyes. He turned to Jade, his hand trembling so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. You knew Dalton? You texted him like that." Jade froze in the center of the room, lips pressed tight, but fear had already begun crawling across her face. She tried to compose herself, but her eyes betrayed her. That's not real. Someone faked it, but her voice shook too much for anyone to believe her. Cross folded his arms, his expression cold, as if peeling back every layer of Jade's lies. These texts were extracted from Dalton's phone during his financial investigation. His password matched the file Harold kept. Nothing is fabricated here. Jade opened her mouth but no longer had any words. The confidence she flaunted since the beginning of the meeting shattered like glass. Cross played a recording. Wind footsteps over dirt, then Harold's voice rough and strained. "Jade, you're destroying Evan's future." My heart ached hearing that. Harold's voice carried disappointment and desperation. He knew she had gone too far, yet he still hoped she would stop before everything collapsed. Then Jade's voice cut in, cold as a chest of ice. "My future is a better life not being buried in that useless land." Harold tried to stay calm. "Dalton is dangerous. You have no idea what you're getting into." Dalton's voice followed, sharp enough to steal the breath from the entire room. "You sell or you disappear." My knees nearly buckled. Evan staggered, chest rising and falling sharply. No one dared pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. Dalton's threat echoed like the voice of someone who had already chosen Harold's fate. Jade stepped back, panic now twisting her expression. Dalton joked like that sometimes. He didn't mean it. No one believed her. Cross closed the recording, standing like the eye of a storm. Harold met Jade and Dalton the night before he died. This audio was pulled from a conservation camera near the Alabama property. And this is still not everything. Evan inhaled sharply, his voice cracking as he spoke. "My father tried to warn us, and we had no idea." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the cold tremor of grief shaking through him. Jade lowered her head, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw fear of being exposed. Cross opened one last file, this time a traffic camera video from the night Harold was found. A car pulled over near the wooded area. The headlights sliced across the asphalt, revealing the license plate. Evan whispered, as if praying he was wrong. "No, that can't be her car." But I recognized the gray Lexus instantly. Jade had driven it to my house too many times. There was no mistaking it. Cross zoomed in, delivering the final blow. Traffic cameras placed Jade near the location where Harold died. The room exploded into a silence louder than any scream. For the first time since all this began, I saw real fear in Jade's eyes. No more acting, no more pretending. Just a liar, finally forced to face a truth she could no longer escape. The conference room felt like ashes after an explosion, everyone shaken but trying to stay composed. Everyone except Jade.
After being cornered by the traffic footage, the affair messages, and Dalton's threats, she rose in the most vicious way possible. No more pretending to be the dutiful wife, no more innocent act. She slammed her hands onto the table as if ready to claw at anyone who stood in her way. "I want to make this clear, Jade," said, tightening her grip on her handbag, her voice sharp as a blade. "That mineral site is part of this family's assets. I am Evan's legal wife. A mother-in-law's inheritance is also the daughter-in-law's right. I want half." I stood speechless. Jade wasn't afraid. She was blinded by greed. Evan jerked his head toward her, eyes blazing with disbelief and heartbreak. "You're out of your mind. You're trying to take what my father left for my mother. The same thing, you insulted." Smirked, her gaze dripping with contempt. "Why not? She didn't work for anything. I'm the one who deserves it." Evan trembled. Then, for the first time in his life, he stood tall like a real man. "You were never family," he shouted. "Not for a single day did you love me or see my father as your father. All you ever cared about was money, a title." Jade's lips curved into a broken smile. "Family. Stop lying to yourself, Evan. You're as naive as your father." Hearing your father from her mouth felt like a blade sliding into my chest. Then came the sentence that made the entire room freeze, as if the air had been sucked out. "Harold deserved to die. He was as selfish as your mother." Her voice echoed cold enough to raise every hair on my body. Evan staggered back. I grabbed the table edge just to stay standing. Even the relatives behind us gasped, horrified by the monster revealing itself. Jade's breathing grew harsher, her eyes wild. "I've tolerated Harold, tolerated your mother, tolerated this whole family long enough. I want a divorce, and I will take what's mine, even if I have to drag her to court." Evan screamed, "No one is taking anything from my mother. You're not my wife anymore." Jade laughed, a sound sharp as shattered glass. "You think divorce saves you? Without that mineral site, you are nothing. I'll step over your corpse if I have to." I didn't recognize what stood in front of us anymore. This wasn't my daughter-in-law, not the woman my son once admired. This was something else, a dark, hungry shadow ready to bite everything it touched. In the chaos, Cross stepped forward, his expression tight like a drawn bowstring. "I think that's enough arguing," he said, placing a small plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a tiny glass vial, its label scratched off. The entire room inhaled sharply. Cross locked eyes with Jade. "This vial was found in your belongings. We just received the forensic report. The substance inside matches the toxin found in Harold's system." The silence slammed down hard. Jade froze for a full 3 seconds, then wavered like someone hit over the head. The false confidence drained from her face, leaving only a pale, exposed fear. I heard my heart beat 3 loud, slow, heavy thuds, like a hammer striking a coffin. Evan stared at her eyes, red and filled with disbelief. "What did you do to my father?" No one breathed. No one blinked. Jade opened her mouth, searching for a lie, an excuse, anything, but nothing came out. And in that moment, I knew. Every mask she had worn, every lie she had spoken, every attempt to manipulate the truth had fallen to the cold floor beneath her feet. The woman who once mocked me, belittled me, humiliated me, was now standing under the unforgiving light of her own truth. No one in the room moved. The small vial Cross placed on the table felt like a doorway to hell, but he wasn't done yet. He turned to me with eyes heavy, as if preparing to reveal something even darker. "Marjorie, we need to go to Alabama. There's something under your old house, something Harold hid." My legs weakened, but I nodded. Within hours, Evan Cross and I stood in front of the old wooden house where Harold once lived. Memories came flooding back, but this wasn't the time for nostalgia. Cross led us to the backyard where the soil had been carefully packed by Harold's own hands. He removed a weathered wooden plank, revealing a metal hatch with a combination lock. Cross keyed in the digits. The hatch popped open. A rush of cold, damp air rose from below like the breath of darkness itself. A staircase led down into the earth. I trembled. Evan held my hand. "Mom, I'm right here." We descended the narrow steps. Beneath the house was a concrete bunker, small but solid, built like a hidden command room. In the center stood an old server tower, its screen still glowing faintly. Cross turned it on, and several video files appeared. "Harold installed cameras here," Cross said. "He knew every meeting about the mine had to be documented." The first video played automatically. The timestamp showed the night before Harold died. Harold sat on a wooden chair, shoulders slumped with age, but eyes unshakably firm. Jade and Dalton stood opposite him, their shadows stretching across the cold concrete floor. Harold looked straight at Dalton and said each word a blow against the darkness surrounding him. "I'm not selling the land, even if you kill me." My hand flew to my mouth. Evan inhaled sharply, his fingers whitening as he gripped the table. Dalton gave a low, threatening chuckle. "Old man, I gave you time." "But you don't seem to understand how fragile your position really is." Jade stepped forward, impatience twisting her face, revealing a version of her I had never seen. "Sell the land. Don't make me do something you won't want to watch." Harold turned toward Jade, disappointment and steel mingling in his voice. "You're throwing yourself off a cliff. Evan doesn't deserve this betrayal." Jade snapped back, her calm facade gone completely. "You old stubborn fool. If you die, the land still goes to Evan, and I'll take it back another way." Cross paused the video, pointing to a corner of the screen. This is the moment Harold realized he might not survive the night, but he prepared himself. The next clip showed Harold slipping something into Cross's pocket. Cross, younger in the footage, standing at the bunker entrance with confusion in his eyes. "If anything happens to me, I'm giving this to you," Harold said. "Don't trust anyone except Marjorie." My chest tightened painfully. Harold had tried to protect us the only way he could. Cross resumed the footage. Then came the moment none of us were ready for. Dalton moved first. He stepped toward Harold and shoved him hard. Harold crumpled backward, his head striking the wooden chair with a sickening thud. I screamed, but only the ghost of my own voice echoed in the bunker. Jade reached into her purse, pulling out a small vial, the same type Cross had found in her belongings. She uncapped it, her hands trembling, but her eyes blazing with intention. "Do it," Dalton ordered. Jade crouched down, pressing the vial against Harold's lips. Harold tried to resist, but his strength was gone. His body convulsed once, twice, and then fell completely still. Silence filled the bunker like a grave. Evan dropped to his knees, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I held him tight, my tears falling silently. Cross shut off the screen. The darkness around us thickened. "Finally," he spoke, voice weighted with finality. "With this timeline and this footage, it's enough to charge them with first-degree murder." I looked up toward the staircase where a thin sliver of daylight cut through the darkness. Walking out of this bunker meant the truth was no longer buried, and none of our lives would ever be the same again. We returned to the inheritance room that afternoon, carrying every piece of evidence from the secret bunker in Alabama. The atmosphere was entirely different from the morning. No whispers, no greedy faces eager to divide assets. Every eye was locked on Jade, pale, shaking her face twisted in fear. Dalton was there too, freshly summoned by the police for questioning after appearing in the video with her. Cross set his laptop on the table, replaying the most damning files. Each image was a blade slicing through the last layers of lies Jade had wrapped around herself. Jade shot up, slamming both palms onto the table. "I didn't kill anyone. I just wanted to scare him." Her scream cracked through the room like shattering glass. I watched her and saw pure desperation, ugly, raw, feral like a cornered animal. Cross didn't flinch. "Jade, you forced a man with a weak heart to ingest medication. You threatened him. You stood there while he convulsed. That is first-degree murder under state law." Jade shook her head violently, her hair falling messily across her face. "I didn't know the drug would kill him. I just wanted him to give in." Behind me, Evan's voice trembled, cut by grief. "Jade, what are you saying? You wanted my father scared? You watched him seize and didn't call for help?" Jade tried reaching toward Evan, but he stepped away. "Evan, please, you have to believe me. I didn't mean—" "Don't say my name," Evan shouted. Cross played the next video, Dalton leaning toward the bunker camera, his voice dripping with menace. "You sell or you disappear." Dalton leapt to his feet, face red with panic. "I didn't kill anyone. She made me do all of it." He jabbed a trembling finger at Jade. "She said if I didn't help, she'd leak our messages and ruin my career." "I only wanted to scare the old man." Jade snapped toward him, voice trembling. "No, you wanted that land. I didn't force you." Their battle was pathetic. Two snakes biting each other to survive. But Cross silenced them with one click. The screen shifted. The bunker camera wide angle captured everything. Harold falling after Dalton's shove. Jade stepping forward, the vial in her hand. Cross zoomed in. Frame by frame, the truth became undeniable. Jade opening the vial, Dalton stepping back, Jade forcing the drug toward Harold's mouth. The room froze. Time stopped as that image lingered on the screen. Every relative who had mocked me earlier could no longer bear to look at Jade. Even they felt the horror in the truth now laid bare. Evan stood behind me, silent. He had cried so much there were no tears left. He stared at the screen, at the woman he had once cherished, and I watched his heart break beyond repair. Jade collapsed into her chair, head bowed, whispering through choked breaths. I didn't mean to." No one believed her. Dalton's face drained of color, his hands gripping the chair as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. Cross closed the laptop. These three conspired to seize the land, threatened Harold, and caused his death. Every piece of evidence aligns. Jade trembled violently. Dalton looked for an escape route like an animal in a trap. And then, at the peak of the room's suffocating silence, the doors burst open. A squad of police officers stormed the inheritance hearing. The lead officer read the charges aloud. Jade Parker, Councilman Dalton Harris, and Attorney Perry Ward. "You are under arrest for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit property fraud." No one breathed. No one spoke. I stood there watching the ones who mocked me, destroyed my husband, and tried to devour my family get handcuffed in front of everyone. Finally, the truth had dragged them into the light. The day of the trial arrived under a sky so heavy it looked ready to collapse onto everything my family had endured. I walked into the courtroom with cold hands and a burning heart. Harold was gone, but the truth he left behind had become a blade no one could dodge. Evan walked behind me, thinner than before. Cross took his place as a key witness, calm yet unbreakably firm. Jade entered with her hands cuffed. Gone was the confident, arrogant beauty who once sneered at me in front of our relatives. Her eyes were sunken, her lips pale, and she scanned the room as if searching for an escape that did not exist. Dalton sat beside her, also in cuffs. The proud aura of a celebrated councilman had vanished. Perry Ward, the lawyer, who helped them, slumped as if he already knew his fate. The trial began. The prosecutor presented every piece of evidence: footage from the underground bunker, incriminating messages, audio recordings, forensic results from the vial of medication. Each piece was a nail, sealing Jade and Dalton's grotesque conspiracy. Then the judge called Evan to the stand. My son stood shoulders tense, struggling to remain upright. His voice cracked when he began, but each word tore through the courtroom like lightning. My father died because he trusted the wrong people and because I didn't protect my mother. The entire room froze. I lowered my head, eyes stinging. Evan continued, voice breaking under the weight of guilt. My father believed everyone can change. He believed Jade would become better. He believed she loved me. But he was wrong, and so was I. I let my mother be humiliated in front of everyone because I trusted the wrong person. A few people began to cry. Even the judge paused before letting Evan step down. Jade stared at him trembling, but he didn't look back. When it was her turn, Jade stood with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. But her pleas couldn't move a single soul. "Evan, don't let them take me," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I love you. Please." Evan never turned around. He kept his gaze fixed upward, as if holding himself together by force. I watched Jade crumble, not with anger, but with a deep sadness for the person she had allowed herself to become. Finally, the judge stood. "The court hereby rules." Jade grasped the table edge, face drained of color. Dalton clenched his eyes shut. Jade Parker, guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced 20 years in state prison. Jade collapsed into her chair speechless. Dalton Harris, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy for asset acquisition, sentenced 35 years. Dalton didn't argue. He simply bowed his head defeated. All asset claims made by Jade Parker are dismissed. That final sentence froze the greedy hopes of every relative who had been waiting in silence. Jade broke into sobs, raw and hopeless. Why did it become like this?" she whispered. The officers moved in and cuffed her and Dalton. I watched them being let out not with triumph, but with the sense that justice had finally arrived, even if late. As I prepared to leave the courtroom, Pross stepped beside me and laid a steady hand on my shoulder. His eyes held something heavier than anything we had heard in that room. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "There's one more secret Harold never had the chance to tell you." My heartbeat faltered. I looked at Cross, feeling the ground shift beneath me once again. What could possibly be larger than everything already revealed? And why hadn't Harold managed to say it? I knew then the most painful truth was still waiting. The courtroom gradually emptied, footsteps echoing against the cold stone floor. But Cross's words still hovered in my mind like a door opening into the deepest secret Harold had carried with him to the grave. We returned home, the very house that once brought peace, now so silent it felt suffocating. Evan sat in the living room for a long time, face buried in his hands. He didn't cry, but his shoulders trembled enough for me to see the storm raging inside him. Eventually, he called out to me. "Mom," Cross said, "Dad left one last thing for you." I sat beside Evan. Cross placed a thick envelope on the table. The edges were worn as if it had been held tightly for a long time. When I opened it, the scent of old paper mixed with the wooden walls and tightened my chest. A letter, Harold's handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I read the first line. Marjorie, if you're reading this, it means you've survived the cruelest part. But the most important thing is still with you. I bit my lip, fighting back tears. Cross handed me a small notebook containing Harold's handwritten plans for the mine, but that wasn't what froze me. It was the final sentence in the letter, written in thin, slanted strokes, like Harold's last breath on paper. If Evan learns to bow his head to his mother, the boy is worthy of standing beside her. I gasped silently. Harold, even in death, he still believed Evan could find his way back. Evan read the line, and his hands shook violently. He turned toward me, his eyes full of tears. "Mom." He couldn't speak another word. Evan sank to his knees in front of me, wrapping his arms around me like a small child who had just lost his world. "Mom, I'm sorry for not protecting you in front of everyone. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I'm sorry for trusting the wrong person, for letting you suffer like that." I placed my hand gently on his head. Each sob from him was like a broken piece of my heart finally falling back into place. "Evan," I whispered, "you're back. That's enough for me." Cross quietly stepped aside to give us a moment. Then he approached again, placing another document on the table. "This is the final thing Harold entrusted to me." I opened it. A joint ownership deed, a legal document clearly stating owners Marjorie Bennett and Evan Bennett. Evan was stunned. "Mom, Dad left it to both of us." I smiled softly. "Your father always wanted you to stand with me, not behind, not outside." Evan bowed his head, tears falling again. "Mom, I promise I'll protect you, and I'll protect everything Dad fought for." Cross added gently, with that deep, steady voice of his, "Evan is designated as the co-manager of the mineral site. This was Harold's final instruction. He wanted you two to guard what he died to protect." I looked at Evan, then at the window where the late sunlight filtered through the trees. I could almost feel Harold standing there, watching over us, smiling. When I folded the letter, Cross was leaning against the doorway. His eyes were softer than before, no longer cold, but warm, steady, almost hopeful. He stepped forward, tilting his head slightly. "Harold asked me to protect you, and now my time has finally begun." I looked into his eyes. There was more than duty in them. Something deeper, something new, something I never expected to find again. A new door quietly opened. I exhaled slowly, letting the pain, the loss, the hatred fall away behind me. Harrowing as it all was, the most precious thing Harold left me wasn't the mine. It was the right to hold my head high in front of those who tried to bury me. The day they mocked me, saying I only deserved a trash shed, became the day I realized I was the only one holding the key to the future.